Hello and welcome back to the Educated Collins Snap channel. How you doing? As you can see, topic of this particular video is we need more locations like Fogwell's gym. I definitely think I want to kind of discuss like the merits of this and some ideas here. So I do think that Fogwell's gym, both players get double boosters. This game was the new featured location that happened very recently. I think it was a nice change of pace from the location lockdowns that we're used to seeing from Second Dinner. They have had a history of just like making and releasing more restrictive locations as a means to change up the game state. I did like that they moved away from that and kind of gave us the here's just a fun location everyone can play. I wanted to kind of showcase the last 5 feature locations that were added to the game. We have Milano, where turn 5 is the only card you can play here. The Sandbar, where cards with no abilities can't be played here. Ped Mansion, where this turn all cards must be played here. Corcal, which is on turn 5, you take over and play both players' cards for them. And then Asteroid M, where after you play a 3 or 4 cost card, you move it here. So you can really see there's a lot of restriction in some of the featured locations. And I really think that's not what players like, players enjoy. They really want to play their own cards, they want to do their own strategies. And when you add all these restrictive locations, it kind of moves away from that, can feel frustrating, especially when multiple of these appear in the same game and things like that. So players like playing their decks. They also like being rewarded for playing, which is what this recent feature location did really well. New locations that force you to change your strategies can be interesting, but they don't really encourage extra play. So when a new feature location gets added, you look at this location and you basically say, oh, this is interesting, maybe it'll work for my deck, and you do play it. Or you have the opposite reaction where you're like, ooh, another location I don't want to play. Maybe I'll stop playing for the day. And that's really not the response you want from your player base. You don't want to create new content and then half your player base looks at it and says, I don't want to do this. And then they stop playing, right? You want locations that are enjoyable. Lots of people want to play. And that's really what Fogwell did very well. There was a pretty good positive reception for this. Just looking at the community, kind of seeing their feedback, it was pretty much overwhelmingly positive. A lot of people just like getting free stuff. You know, people love free stuff. So it's not a surprise that people liked this location. It was nice to have a beneficial location that everyone could enjoy. There wasn't really any downsides to playing this. You could argue that you hit your credit cap faster, but I think that's not really a big reason or a good reason to kind of not be happy about this location. Another thing that was happening was there was a lot of talks of weekend events. So this kind of thing was just players discussing the merits of having this location featured as a new weekend event. So this is like double booster weekend. You'll have this location as a featured for the weekends for a double booster event. I personally don't really like the idea. I don't like events being tied to the RNG of feature locations. So feature locations appear 50% of the games at this current time. And there's definitely going to be some players that even though they play like 20 matches, they're not going to have 10 of these locations. They might have, 5 or so. And that kind of RNG just I don't think is necessarily needed to be tied to a weekend event or something like that. So if they were going to do something like a weekend event or anything like that, I think it should just be all games, that kind of thing, like no RNG of locations. You don't have to have like this. It is a location, but it doesn't actually affect the game in a meaningful way, right? It doesn't add rocks or destroy anything. So I think if you were going to do an event, it's just fine to just have it blanket for everybody instead of having it tied to a location added or anything like that. Now, with those talks, it kind of made me think, why aren't there double booster events? This is also more of a topic of what happened to the old events, right? They used to have old events that people would participate in. I wouldn't say they were very positively received, and there was enough sentiment, negative sentiment, that they did mentioned that they would be stopping making those events for the foreseeable future. However, I don't think no event is better than a bad event most of the time, because at least even though the events weren't like super positively received, at least they gave people credits, they gave people a reason to play, etc., etc. Where without any events, right, you don't have that those extra credits that people enjoy. You don't have those extra reasons to play to complete the event, blah blah blah. So even though those events weren't necessarily the best kind of events, I still would have preferred them over just the scrapping no events for like months at a time that we have right now. So I do think something like a double booster weekend event, or whenever you do it doesn't have to be weekends. It's a good way to encourage people to play, and especially weekend play. So usually right now the concern of weekend is that when people reach the weekend, they've usually finished their weekly challenges, which is the 25 daily missions you have to complete. Usually by that time, you can do six a day or so. So, 5 days you can do 30. So if you're doing your dailies, you're going to complete it in 5 days or less. So usually by that time the weekend rolls around and they don't have this weekly challenge to really encourage them to continue playing. I think something like a double booster weekend and the weekend events that they are adding to the game will help people retain that, oh, I want to play, I want to take advantage of these resources, things like that. So I think it's a pretty good idea to have that kind of system in place for the future. Now, we've talked about the Fogwell gym, but I did also want to create some ideas for more locations that people can think about. Oh, this would actually be interesting. So the downside of Fogwell that I thought was not that great was that it didn't really change how people approach the match, right? So it did double the boosters, and that was fine and all, but it doesn't change how you would play the game, right? The location comes up and it's like, ooh, this is a ruin, essentially. And that's not really something you want to do. You want those locations to have meaningful impacts in the game. And I kind of thought about two locations that I thought could be pretty cool. So the first one is the player that controls the location at the end of the game gets 10 credits. So this one is just generally, if when the game ends, whoever is winning that location will get the credits. I think that one's interesting because it means people could just focus on winning that location instead of winning the game. And that's something you have to kind of play around. Do I want to fully invest in winning the location, or do I want to fully invest in winning the game? 10 credits isn't super crazy, and we'll talk about that in the future, but that was an idea. The second one is the player or players that control this location after turn 6 gains 10 gold. So this one is a little bit more restrictive in that you have to play you have to basically complete the game to get the gold. If you leave early, then no one gets the gold. There is definitely that issue of maybe players leaving before this completes, right? That might be a thing that might make this not feel that good, because people always play and then they'll leave before it completes. So maybe you create a system where if players leave early or so, the one that leaves automatically loses it, and the one that doesn't leave gets it for free. That might be a way of doing it, but I like the idea of kind of encouraging people to stay till the game ends if they want to receive this gold. It could be, you could change it now that I'm talking about it, where if the game ends, or if the game reaches turn 6, both players get 10 gold. Maybe that's better. If the game reaches if the game passes turn 6, both players get 10 gold. I think that one would be a lot easier of making people stay till the end of the game. So maybe that one's more easier, because if you do it the other way around, people will just leave. So I'm workshopping this, on the fly here. All right, those are just ideas. The first one was the one that I came up with, and the second one was just like a follow-up. But I think just giving people a reason to stay until turn 6 would be pretty interesting. Now, isn't locations that give resources ripe for abuse? I would say not really. Let's say you have an event that gives 500 credits or gold, which is something they've done before. A player would have to encounter this location, win 50 times, or stay till turn 6 50 times just to get that amount of resources. And instead of just giving a player 200, 300 resources or credits or something. You could make it part of the game. And if players want to like tie there or abuse or stay to get the extra resources, right? Let them. Like if players like, let's say um they stay on the location, or if no one plays in that location that gives you credits, and they just do it as like a, you know, they thumbs up or whatever, they or fist bump, and then they do that. Like that's fine. That's a cool mechanic that makes players work together to get resources, and I'm kind of okay with that kind of camaraderie within the game to kind of like squeeze 10 credits from second dinner. Like I'm perfectly fine with that. So I think that would not be a particular issue that you'd worry about. And generally, it's not a huge amount of credits that are like going to super encourage weird abuse. I think it would generally be a fine system to implement. And then I kind of had some mock-ups or so of those type of locations. So Doom Castle was what I did for um, the first one, and then Universal Bank for the second one. So I kind of had to do research, find out what locations would make sense for it, and I hope this made sense. There wasn't a lot of images for Universal Bank, probably intentional, but those type of things are just the kind of ideas that I hope Second Dinner really thinks about it and really brainstorms. So overall thoughts is I hope they do continue to make locations that players will enjoy and encourage extra play. And I would love to see events like Double Booster Weekends and events similar to that. Some of the events of old, even now, would still be appreciated. And I just think locations that restrict play should be avoided. It's generally not a super fun thing to see a feature location and think, oh man, I'm not going to be able to do what I want to do because of it. So I don't think they're bad to have, but I just don't think they should be like every single new location has an aspect of restriction, which is currently what has been happening, except for this new Fogwell. So hopefully you guys like this type of idea. Definitely thought it was something that deserves being talked about, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Educated Collins snap. Once you watch him, you won't go back. He'll teach you tomorrow, snap.